Okay, and now we want to continue our coverage, and for that I want to bring in two of our correspondents who have their ears to the ground in Washington and in Ottawa. I've got our Washington correspondent, who of course is filling in on Morning Live, Katie Simpson, and also the host of The House from Ottawa, but she's in Toronto right now, Catherine Cullen. Thank you guys for being here, and I really want to pick your brain about what you make of these trade talks. Katie, I want to start with you because I understand you've got a little bit of news to share with us on the trade front.
Yeah, just a little bit of additional explanation from the White House this morning. So we routinely sort of ask the White House questions about, okay, anything related to Canada, and just, try to get some clarity around some questions. So we've asked whether President Trump has taken a phone call from Prime Minister Mark Carney yet. They didn't answer that question. But I asked another question about why is it that, Canada is having to deal with these tariffs now when all these other countries get another 7 days. And what I'm told, according to a White House official on background, so the other countries, they are not getting another week to negotiate. It's just a timeline to allow border officials to be able to implement these tariffs because it's very much a complicated and complex system. But what they said at the end, Canada's tariffs are easier to implement. Canada, moreover, has repeatedly demonstrated a lack of seriousness in trade discussions as it relates to removing trade barriers. So that, again, is a White House official speaking on background, sort of picking apart and criticizing the Canadian trade team or Canadian trade policy, as we have consistently seen the Donald Trump administration do for months now.
And so when you hear that, Catherine, what do you make of that sort of picking apart the negotiations, the talks that Canada has put forward?
It is fascinating to watch the way in which Donald Trump has dealt with Prime Minister Mark Carney in particular. We can all think back to that meeting in the White House where it seemed like things were going well.
Cordially,
and it is, Donald Trump is a mercurial figure, and in many ways this relationship itself seems mercurial. It's not that long ago he was talking about Canada as a country that's very nasty to deal with. At the same time, I was speaking to an official in the Prime Minister's office. The delegation is still on the ground in Washington, D.C. We know there is this question of whether or not there might be a phone call today between the two leaders, although I'm told that certainly Ottawa doesn't want to project a sense that they are waiting breathlessly to speak to the president on the phone. They say much of the work would happen at meetings with this delegation in Washington. Kirsten Hillman, Dominic LeBlanc. The Prime Minister is going ahead with his day. He is in the office. He is taking briefings. He is having meetings. He is thinking about supports for folks who are affected. So there is work to do. I think there is a sense of open-mindedness that because perhaps of that mercurial relationship, my words, not the words of the official.
Yes, sure.
We don't know. Donald Trump said 48 hours ago, no extensions. Mexico wound up having an extension, right? So I think there is a sense of, well, let's wait and see what happens next. Is this process over? Certainly it is not encouraging to hear those kinds of words, but at the same time, this is a negotiation, and we know Donald Trump likes to play hardball.
And it's interesting because we all look to Mexico, and there was one of these tariff rounds that Mexico got an exemption, or got an extension rather, and Canada's followed. And that perhaps some were thinking would happen in this case, but it feels almost as though Canada is being made an example of. Now, Katie, you were there for the last CUSMA, NAFTA renegotiations. You were part of that. How different is it this time around watching what's happening? Because the tensions seem to be a lot higher, and the stakes too.
So in all the conversations I'm having with people, officials who are sort of either in the know or involved in everything that's going on right now, is that what is going on now is very different than what happened back during those NAFTA negotiations. Back at the time, it was suggested to me that people around President Donald Trump, that they really saw the importance of the Canada-U.S. relationship and how important it is to American businesses, how many jobs are really interconnected there. And that so when Canada was really trying to make its case or trying to get some movement on those difficult negotiations, there were allies in the White House who would try to push Canada's case, and they weren't necessarily afraid to sort of push back against Trump in behind closed doors in those conversations, which is a very normal part of governing. People have disagreements or people express different opinions, and that is a very normal part of getting to a decision-making process. What I am told is this time around, things are very different because what happens when people speak up against Donald Trump? Generally, at least in public, hasn't been great. And Donald Trump this time around has really surrounded himself with people who are not questioning him. They're people who are loyal to the cause. They believe in him, and they believe, his instincts are the way to, make America great again, as they all say. And so in this moment, when Canada might need an ally, when Canada might need someone close to the president, try and push that case, there isn't necessarily that window or that avenue there. And so things are really difficult. Now, that said, everything I understand is that there is still like hope that things will get better.
Right.
We might not get to like a tariff-free zone anytime soon, but no one is getting to a tariff-free zone.
That is a good
point. Nobody.
Well, and Arthi, I think that's an important point in all of this is the global context of all of this. Like, yes, Donald Trump himself is different, but also what's playing out is different. I'm in Toronto because I'm guest hosting The Current this week, and we spoke to the former chief economist of the International Monetary Fund about this moment. And he said, this is the biggest thing since Nixon went off the gold standard in the 70s, right? This is an inflection point. It is a time of great disruption. Donald Trump is changing, yes, certainly things in terms of trade, but just the relationships around the world. And so it makes it that much more complicated for Canada to try to find a space. I think there is certainly some hope amongst some Canadian business types that we have spoken to that CUSMA, the renegotiating, the renewal of this Canada-U.S. trade agreement, that perhaps that could bring some more normalcy.
Right.
That's not happening until the fall. And also, frankly, normalcy, as Katie pointed out, that's not the order of the day.
Right.
But that's very difficult for the business community, for the economy.
And to your point, Katie, I think there's a lot of analysis about how Trump's first term was sort of testing the waters, and now it's sort of a much more emboldened approach that we're seeing from the U.S. president. I kind of want both of you guys to weigh in on this in terms of how Mark Carney is being viewed, not only by Washington, but perhaps you can weigh in about globally too, because that also weighs in to how, because there is sort of this superficial, appearance-based nature that I think an approach that the U.S. takes to that. So how is that weighing into the conversations, the dynamic, and then the results or consequences that we're seeing?
Go ahead.
Okay, all from the view from Washington.
Okay, I'll take it.
So I would say there was definitely a change in tone, and we all saw it when Mark Carney went into the White House versus sort of the end of Justin Trudeau's tenure.
Sure.
Justin Trudeau, as he was sort of, everyone knows about that meeting that happened at Mar-a-Lago when Donald Trump was elected and he was threatening tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Justin Trudeau got on a plane, went down to Mar-a-Lago with the Canadian sort of trade delegation and started having those conversations. Whatever happened at that table left a lasting impression on Trump, and he kept bringing up the fact that, Justin Trudeau said, if we put these tariffs on, we're not going to have a country. And I don't think that Justin Trudeau framed it that way. And I've heard from sources that that's not exactly how it was framed. But it doesn't matter how it actually came across. It's how Trump remembered it,
right,
and how Trump continues to project it out there. So whether it is reflective of reality or not, it is a part of Donald Trump's reality, and that's the reality we all got to live in right now. So that had really sort of set the path on this weird and uncomfortable tone. We all know that Donald Trump doesn't like when people stand up to him, and Justin Trudeau, the retaliation tactic was sort of the method that they were going to go with. And we saw that when Canada announced reciprocal tariffs as a result of the tariffs that Donald Trump implemented on Canada. And so that really soured things, and it was really viewed that Mark Carney was going to be the reset person there. He was going to come in and refresh that relationship. From everything I understand so far, the relationship is in a much better spot. But again, even if the relationship is in a better spot, we still have a whole host of tariffs. It's got to lead to tangible results, and that's what the pressure point is right now.
And globally too, of course, to you, there's we've got the Prime Minister going out and forging these other relationships, strengthening these other relationships.
Well, and he has talked about Canada as being the most European of non-European countries. I think it's evident that he does have strong relationships with the leader of the UK, France, and whatnot. And that is part of Mark Carney's strategy here, right? Canada's strategy, diversifying the economy, building stronger bonds with other countries. I mean, the sense we have from Donald Trump is that, in fact, Donald Trump holds Mark Carney in pretty decent regard, pretty decent esteem. We saw that when they met at the White House. We saw that again, the G7 in Kananaskis. But to Katie's point, that is not necessarily helping Canada in terms of the outcome. The other really interesting perception question that I'm waiting to find out the answer to in all of this, Arthi, is we have to think, why was Mark Carney elected by Canadians? We know job number one was this relationship, and it was trying to get a deal. Now, a deal is still possible, but I think we all see that there is also a path forward where there is not a deal, where this sort of rolls into the conversations about the renewal of the trade agreement. How will Canadians perceive that? Is there going to be sympathy for the fact that any country that does have a deal has had to deal with a certain amount of tariffs already, that perhaps this is the best case scenario for Canada when you're dealing with somebody who is mercurial, unreasonable if we look at the continued emphasis on fentanyl, or are they going to push back a bit and say this isn't what we hired you for?
You guys, I want to keep you here all day and just keep chatting with you, but apparently the control room is telling me we gotta go. So thank you to both of you, Katie Simpson, our Washington correspondent, Catherine Cullen, the host of The House from Ottawa. Thank you both for being here, for breaking this down for our viewers. I appreciate having you here.
It's great
Party
to be here.
on.
Thanks, guys.